We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
There is a major development in this case that has been building quietly for weeks, and it deserves to be laid out with total precision. This is not being framed as gossip, rumor, or internet chatter. What follows is presented as a documented financial trail running through the heart of the investigation, involving property records, legal paperwork, law enforcement activity, and one reported conversation between a mother and daughter that, if confirmed, could become one of the most consequential details in the entire story. For months, the public has been flooded with the mechanics of what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The surveillance gaps, the cameras going dark, the masked figure at the door wearing a balaclava and double gloves, the ransom notes, and the minute-by-minute reconstruction of that night have all been examined in depth. The method has been dissected from every angle. What has remained elusive is motive. Why would anyone orchestrate such a calculated plan against an 84-year-old woman alone in her own home? That missing piece may now be coming into focus. According to a report from Hidden Times, Annie Guthrie allegedly asked her mother for a loan not long before Nancy vanished from her home on February 1st. Nancy reportedly refused. That claim has not been confirmed by law enforcement, and the Guthrie family has not publicly addressed it. It also has not been publicly denied. Even so, the report landed in the middle of an investigation already clouded by financial questions involving Annie and her husband, Tommaso. Suddenly, the property values, the power of attorney, the boxes being removed from Nancy's residence, and the vehicle held for 40 days all seem to point toward a possible starting point. Public records show Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home is worth about $1 million, located in one of Tucson's most sought-after neighborhoods. Annie and Tommaso live roughly 4 miles away, and their home is estimated at around $650,000. On its own, that difference means very little. Parents often own more valuable property than their children. But when investigators and observers ask why Nancy may have been specifically targeted, the value of her assets becomes impossible to ignore. In cases involving harm to elderly people by someone within their circle, the driving force is often not rage or revenge. More often, it is access. Access to money, property, and control. Then there is the power of attorney document. One circulated record showed that in May 2025, 8 months before Nancy disappeared, Tommaso signed a durable power of attorney naming Annie as his agent over financial and property matters. Legal commentators publicly noted that such paperwork can be routine, especially during refinancing or real estate transactions. That may very well be true. But even routine paperwork takes on a different tone when it appears inside a sequence that seems to move in one direction. May 2025, the power of attorney is signed. At some point before January 31st, Annie reportedly asks Nancy for money and is refused. On January 31st, Nancy has dinner at Annie and Tommaso's home. Tommaso drives her back. By February 1st, Nancy is gone. Any one of those moments can be dismissed on its own. Taken together, they begin to look less random and more connected. Attention has also turned to what has been happening at Nancy's house. In recent weeks, photos surfaced showing individuals at the residence loading items into vehicles, with Annie's Honda CR-V visible in the images. Boxes were seen being removed. Legally, that raises obvious questions. Nancy Guthrie has not been declared dead. There is no death certificate. Probate has not begun. No court has publicly authorized the removal of personal belongings from the home of a missing woman in an active criminal case. And yet items appear to be leaving the property. There has been no official confirmation that Annie and Tommaso intend to move into Nancy's home. Still, between the boxes being carried out, Annie's repeated presence at the residence, and Tommaso reportedly moving through the house and garage with apparent familiarity on the same day ransom notes became public, many observers have drawn their own conclusions. The image that emerges is of a family appearing ready to assume control over a property whose owner has not legally been declared dead. That is not a trivial detail. If property is being removed from the home of a missing person during an active federal investigation, authorities are almost certainly aware of it. If it continues without public intervention, that suggests either investigators are monitoring and documenting the activity or there is an explanation the public has not been given. Neither possibility does much to calm concern. There is also the issue of vulnerability, and this is where the story becomes even more unsettling. Nancy's life, in the period leading up to her disappearance, appears to have been surrounded by missing safeguards. Her dog had died and had not been replaced. Her camera system was reportedly not actively recording. She removed her hearing aids every night, leaving her unable to hear what was happening around her. Medication she needed, which authorities said could be dangerous to miss, sat nearby. There was no overnight caregiver, no alarm system, and no medical alert device. Yet each of those protections could have been put in place for relatively little money. A camera subscription might cost around $15 a month. A medical alert pendant can cost less than $1 a day. Overnight care in Tucson is available for a few $100s a week. These are basic precautions, not extravagant luxuries. The family had the means. Savannah Guthrie is among the highest-paid broadcast journalists in America, and the combined financial strength of 3 adult siblings would have made these safeguards easily affordable. Yet none of them were in place. Nancy remained alone in a $1 million home without active cameras, without monitoring, without overnight assistance, and without a reliable way to call for help after removing her hearing aids. In practical terms, she was isolated and exposed. If the report about Annie requesting money is accurate, that changes how those omissions are interpreted. What might otherwise look like neglect or oversight begins to take on a more troubling dimension. If someone in the family was under financial pressure and had asked Nancy for money only to be refused, then the failure to secure this elderly woman's safety may not simply read as a lapse. It may suggest that her vulnerability was either not seen as important enough to address or, in the darkest reading, was allowed to continue because an unprotected woman in a highly valuable home is far easier to reach than one shielded by alarms, cameras, and a caregiver just down the hall. Viewed through the lens of money and access rather than just timestamps and surveillance footage, the night of January 31st takes on a strikingly different tone. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy requested an Uber from her home and rode to Annie and Tommaso's house for dinner. That trip is documented, down to the timestamps and in-car footage, and the driver reportedly cooperated with the FBI. The ride there is clear and accounted for. The ride back is not. Nancy did not return by Uber. Tommaso drove her home, which means he controlled when they left, the route they took, and when she arrived. His version of those last moments, including the account that he walked her in and watched the garage close, stands entirely on its own. No camera recorded her arrival. No neighbor has publicly verified seeing it. No app created an external timestamp. The final account of Nancy's last known return home comes from a single person. If the reported loan refusal did happen shortly before that dinner, then the emotional weight of the evening becomes much heavier. The last daughter Nancy reportedly spent time with was the one who may have asked her for money and been told no. The last person known to drive Nancy home was that daughter's husband. And what followed is just as striking. The 14 hours between about 9:50 that night and noon the next day passed without anyone from that household calling, texting, or driving 4 miles to check on her. That gap is difficult to overlook. Nancy was 84. She had a pacemaker. She reportedly needed medication at 10 p.m. that authorities said could be dangerous to miss. She was about to remove her hearing aids and become effectively cut off from the outside world. She was alone in a house without active cameras, alarms, or a medical alert system. Annie and Tommaso knew all of that. They had just spent the evening with her. Yet from the moment her garage door shut until a friend noticed her absence from a church livestream the next morning, there was silence. In many families, especially when an elderly parent lives alone, a quick nighttime check-in is second nature. A brief text, a short call, a made at home message often happens without thinking. That kind of ordinary care appears to have been missing here. Its absence created exactly the kind of uninterrupted window a perpetrator would need: no check-in, no surprise visit, no call that might be answered by someone other than Nancy. What was once just a timeline begins to look like an opportunity. The 911 call adds another layer of mystery. The recording has never been released. Not the audio, not a transcript, not even a meaningful summary. In Arizona, 911 recordings are public records, and in high-profile missing person cases they often surface quickly. Yet months into this investigation, the public still has not heard what Annie said when she reported her mother missing. Retired Detective Bob Gilliam, in a public interview, said there is likely investigative material on that recording that law enforcement does not want made public yet. He went further and suggested it may not be released until a trial date is near. That word, trial, carries enormous weight. It suggests a case moving toward charges, or at least one being handled with courtroom strategy in mind. The idea that investigators may be preserving the 911 call as evidence raises obvious questions. What is on that recording? How did the call begin? What did Annie say before the dispatcher asked anything? Did she describe what she saw in a way that could matter later? Did she mention the blood on the porch? Did she include details someone arriving fresh at the scene might not yet know? Then there is the 7-minute delay. The family reportedly arrived at Nancy's house at 11:56 a.m., but the 911 call was not placed until 12:03 p.m. 7 minutes passed before calling for help about a missing 84-year-old woman. If blood was visible on the porch, and if it was not especially hidden, then those 7 minutes become deeply important. Were they searching the home? Speaking with each other? Deciding how to describe the scene? Moving through spaces or touching things that later became relevant? The recording may capture background voices, sounds inside the house, or a tone of urgency that could matter enormously. For now, all of that remains sealed. The forensic picture is just as dramatic. A Cody search, which checks DNA against the National Law Enforcement Database, reportedly came back negative. That means the biological material recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home did not match anyone already in the criminal justice system. No prior arrests. No prior convictions. No existing record in the database. In one stroke, that appears to rule out the obvious repeat offender profile many people might imagine. Instead, the DNA seems to point to someone far less conspicuous. Someone who, on paper, looks ordinary. Someone without a criminal past. Someone who would not immediately raise alarm in daily life. That possibility is especially significant in a case already filled with questions about familiarity, access, and people who may have moved comfortably within Nancy's world before she disappeared.